we're waiting just a few more seconds for the waiting room traffic to slow down. I can see we have lots of friends still joining us, and I'm so excited that you're here. My name is Linda Stanbridge. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the honor of serving with lots of these other wonderful folks on our Michigan Mission Center Diversity and Inclusion team. We call it NCAC for short, naming, claiming, and acting change. And this group is amazing to work with. So thank you everybody for all your hard work in preparing this exciting day that we have planned. And thank you especially to Eric and I. She has the important task of herding all these really motivated cats, and she does an amazing job of keeping us all in line. So welcome this morning to this special service. We'll have our worship here for probably about an hour. And then I want to encourage you for the remainder of the day, if you have the day off and you have some time, to check out some of the other resources that you'll see in the newsletter, on church updates, Facebook and Instagram, about some programs that the University of Michigan is going to be offering today for free on the important topics that Dr. King worked on. So check those things out during the day. We're also focusing on an important speech from Dr. King called A Proper Sense of Priorities. And you can find a link in all the places that I just mentioned if you want to read that at some point today. I would really encourage you to check that out. The other thing is that this evening at 7, we'll be having a discussion group. We'd love to have all of you join us. Everyone is welcome. We will be using the speech, A Proper Sense of Priorities, as some source material, but you are still welcome to join us if you don't have time to read it. It's not a requirement. It might enrich your experience, but we would still be honored to have you. So that's tonight, also on Zoom at 7 p.m. And that one will not be streamed to Facebook because we're going to have some more intimate conversation. So I hope that you can join us later this evening for that. So with all of that being said, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you here to worship with us this morning. Now we'll turn it over to Alan Jones.
Good morning. Above all else, strive to be faithful to Christ's vision of a peaceable kingdom on earth. Courageously challenge cultural, political, and religious trends that are contrary to the reconciling and restoring purposes of God. And finally, pursue peace. Doctrines and Covenants 163, 3b. Would you pray with me, please? Heavenly Parent, we come today to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who challenged us not to let anything or anybody turn us around from following the example of a loving our neighbor as ourselves in line with your spirit. We ask you to make us bold in our efforts to bond with one another in this journey of life. And through this morning's service, give us your power to propagate your way of being and to emulate our brothers, both Martin and Richard, in bringing everyone to your way of life, your way of resistance, your way of overcoming. We ask this as we ask all things in the name that is above every other name, even Jesus the Christ, your Son. Amen.
Join me in singing, We Are the Ones the World Around Us.
Good morning. From a Proper Sense of Priorities by Dr. Martin Luther King, February 6, 1968. On some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it is right.
Good morning, everyone. I paused to once again soak in that quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that Zilphia just shared. And I hope that the testimony that I'm about to share will show some ways in which that has impacted my life. I was hoping to share a testimony, and several came to mind of some particular moment with an individual or a family that was facing oppression and injustice, and ways in which, in my mind, I chose to courageously act. And I have to preface that by saying, I'm a white person, I'm a white female, I'm a white cisgender female. I carry privilege. And as I grew up, I didn't know those words. I didn't recognize and didn't have language to say that I lived as a privileged person in our communities. But I'm grateful for the language and the words that have come along. But there was an innate sense, and I think that that's what Dr. King's words point to, that there is an innate sense, whether it's a moral conscience, a driving force, whether it's our faith that informs us and leads us. So even when I didn't have the words or the language or the framework to understand all those elements, I know that I felt called forward. So rather this morning than a particular moment in time, I just wanted to touch on the many opportunities that I've had in my life. And I want to do that because racism and injustice is so systemic. And as a social worker, well, I have to say, before I became a social worker, I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, which was certainly more diverse than where I've lived for 40 years, which is in northern lower Michigan. And I'm a social worker. So I've worked in a lot of different systems over the years. Back in the 1990s, I worked in the prosecutor's office and began the victim assistance program there. And it didn't take me too long to recognize the injustices that were happening within that system. And frankly, just the blatant injustice that I saw, from law enforcement response and investigation to prosecutor charging decisions, witness treatment, plea agreements, to sentencing, treatment of crime victims, witnesses, and defendants. Anyone who was not of the dominant culture, and anyone who was something other than, frankly, white male, were clearly treated differently. And this grew to the point in my soul that I thought maybe I needed to leave the system. Maybe I needed to leave that because it was painful to watch. And at that time, I felt powerless. I felt powerless. It felt like a big system with many people who had great authority over me and over everybody else in many ways. And I finally knew that my decision came down to I either needed to speak up in some fashion and address and confront that, or leave. And I chose to at least try. And so I went to the prosecutor and, asked to meet with him and just told him what I was seeing and the distress that I was feeling. And just in a very faltering voice, almost like I have this morning trying to talk about it today, years later, just said, this isn't right. And I don't know how to change it. I don't know what you can do to change it, but I have to ask. He said, it's just not right. You must know it's not right. I feel like we need to talk to law enforcement, need to talk to the judges, and just need to address this. And I did say, I said, or I cannot continue in this. I can't call myself somebody who's here to assist people who are experiencing terrible moments in their lives. They've experienced a crime. And now, in addition to the trauma that they experienced, they're being re-traumatized and victimized by the system that's supposed to be here to support them. And he heard me. And we hadn't been working together very long at that point. He came in after I'd been there about 6 months, but he heard me and he arranged meetings with all the law enforcement agencies. They regularly had what they called chiefs meetings. And he took up the cause in a sense himself, took ownership of it, but also said that I had come to him with these concerns. Now, everybody's reaction was not gracious and supportive as his was. And there were clearly lines that were drawn. And there were people, I didn't feel so at risk for myself, but I was there to represent the interests of victims of crime. And I was worried that by speaking up, it might have a backlash effect. And I have to say, it probably did in some instances, but in others, it opened things up. And what I thought of was what I heard years ago about people who couldn't speak up against the Nazis in Europe, but they wouldn't turn their backs. They would bear witness. And so in my own faltering, uneducated fashion, I was trying to bear witness to what I was seeing. We went to the judges and we did see changes. It didn't change the whole system, but I felt like I had taken a step forward for myself and for others. I didn't feel proud or even relieved necessarily. I felt very shaky through the whole process. I couldn't term it courage. It was just a point of almost desperation. And the impact for me, though, was that from that point on, I think my eyes were open to systemic injustice. So I went on to work in education systems, in medical settings, more in the legal system and community organizations. And of course, everywhere I saw that kind of injustice, the blatant mistreatment, the disparities. And I see them still today. It's almost agonizing to find the courage to continue when it seems sometimes like we're making so little progress. What encourages me to continue is the people who I see that do lead the way, that are courageous, the people who are actually impacted more directly by those injustices than I have been in my life, and they keep going forward. And so what I've learned over time in that process is to become more of a student and a listener to those voices and those people, and to hopefully be an advocate and ally that lifts up those voices, amplifies those voices in some fashion, and allow others to take the lead. And for myself to take a role where hopefully I keep learning how the privileges that I walk in can be used in ways to support the things that are being voiced these days with louder voices than I've ever heard before in my life, with clearer voices, with voices that carry on where Dr. King continues to speak to us with such clarity, but other voices that are coming forward to also be leaders, to also provide the way. I know that's not a direct testimony of a single instance, but I hope somewhere in what I've shared, that you can hear a couple of things. One, that although we talk about courage, for me, I hesitate to use that one because I am a privileged person in society. And so any efforts that I make do not require really a level of courage. There are times I've put my job at risk. Occasionally, although not directly, have put my family perhaps at risk. I've put my priesthood at risk. I put my personal reputation at risk, and many relationships, from family to coworkers to colleagues in the community. I've never regretted a single one of those things. And I just hope to continue. And I guess that's where I'll end this morning, is just with the hope to continue to learn, to continue to hear the words that provide language for the experience, and for being able to speak more clearly and supportively, to continue to work to end injustices. Thank you.
So as I was asked to share about courage this morning, I struggled to know where to start. And I landed with a place of looking at all the different steps that take us to acts of courage, because I don't think that we start with taking giant leaps. I think it's small steps that build up again and again. And for me, that's how it was. And sometimes I don't remember the steps when I'm taking that leap. And sometimes I do, and that's makes it even scarier to take those leaps. So I'm a queer person in Lapeer County. And what that means is this is a very rural area. And there's a lot of hate that we've experienced as a family living here just by existing. Within moving into our current house that we're in, within 6 months of being here, our neighbors threatened my safety, my wife's safety, and at the time, my 6-month-old child's safety. They threatened us with physical violence and sexual assault. That's the reality of living where I live. That was, my daughter's 13, 12 years ago. But there was times I wanted to shut down, and I did, but I've kept showing up, and people have stood with me to allow me to take those steps of courage. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, how people keep inviting me into community, and it lets me take those steps of courage. And then those scary moments, I don't let them knock me down. Those moments where my minivan that has liberal queer stickers on it is ran off the road in Lapeer mean I go and buy a truck that you can't run off the road in Lapeer. And I keep showing up. The specific story I wanted to focus on this morning was I had a friend who challenged our congregation to do an LGBT youth camp this past summer. And I'm not going to lie, I was scared at first. How do we make this work post-COVID? How do we make this work in our community? And my church family said, no, we're going to do this. This is important. But we did so knowing the real repercussions of it. We knew that we'd had a drag queen story hour earlier in the year where a local drag queen came in. She read stories to kids, and we had people enter the church and say hateful things to us and try to hand out their propaganda materials to the kids and families. We knew that that was real. Yet we did the camp anyways, and we posted it on social media. And in doing so, we did receive some hate. We received some threats, and it was scary. I think so often when we talk about courage, we focus only on the positive outcomes. And I don't think that does justice today when we think about the story of Dr. Martin Luther King. We have to talk about the scary pieces too, about the threats, about the realness of people in the world throwing things at us, whether that be verbal or physical threats. But the outcome is profound. And the outcome that I want to focus on and leave everyone with this morning is yesterday, one of the youth that came to that camp, they shared in our church yesterday about how we've created a space of safety for them. They shared how they didn't know about anybody in this community as a queer person before entering that camp. They shared how they didn't have a home a month ago, and without that camp, they don't know where they would have landed. So those steps of courage that we take as people lead up to giant distances in other people's lives. And I want to leave you with the challenge to take those steps, because the impact will be profound, even if you don't see that impact.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Erin, for sharing those very personal stories of courage. And thank you for living courageous lives in whatever way you're presented with opportunities. My job in the next 5 or 10 minutes is just to share some thoughts on our focused quote. It's the one that Zilpia read from Dr. Martin Luther King. It came from his speech called A Proper Sense of Priorities. He gave the speech in 1968, not too long before he died. And what drew us to this speech was partly the provocative quote there at the end, but also I hope you had a chance to read it before you came, because he spent some time focusing on some very divisive topics, some really risky topics to talk about. He talks about opposing the war in Southeast Asia. He talks about toxic military industrial complex. He talks about consumerism, really hot button topics that people were telling him, look, this is a little bit out of your wheelhouse, right? Why don't you stay in your lane, and you can talk about civil rights and nonviolence. You can talk about the plight of African Americans today, but this is a little too risky. It's probably not politically expedient to be talking about these other topics. So just don't go there. So the quote we see at the end is his response to that, saying, look, sometimes it's not popular or politically expedient. Sometimes it's risky and not safe, but we are called to speak out. He uses the words, take a position for what is right. And that's our challenge for us today. That's what we're talking about today, is being courageous enough to take a position and make a choice. So in Community of Christ, we say the mission of Jesus Christ is what matters most for the journey ahead, right? Christ's mission is our mission. And what is Christ's mission? We look at Luke 4. That's our familiar text where he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and set free those who are oppressed, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. To which we say, yes, Christ's mission, our mission, set the prisoner free, sight to the blind. We love that. That's what we're all about, right? But the scripture I want to kind of draw a circle around today is not that mission of Jesus Christ, but where he talks about part of his mission later on in Luke in chapter 12. And this is a text that is not, well, it's familiar to us, but it's not as comfortable to us. And it's not the Mormon huggy cozy Jesus that we like to hang around with sometimes. I'll read it to you. This is Luke 12, 48 through 56. He says, from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. I have come to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Do you think I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided. So what is Jesus saying here about his purpose? To bring division, to cast fire upon the earth and set it ablaze? I think what he's saying here is, look, guys, we've talked about living water here and this beautiful metaphor of healing and wholeness for the earth, God's living word with us. But the other side of that coin could be that it's fire. what I'm calling you to do could bring some discomfort. It could bring some hardship. It could be a real challenge. It could not necessarily be safe, politic, or popular. And that's naturally part of the experience of following the way of Jesus Christ. Christ himself was understood that there might be consequences to his particular ministry, right? He said yes to setting the captive free. He said yes to healing the blind and the lame, yes to including the despicable tax collector and the woman at the well. He said yes to lifting up the poor out of poverty. And that's great. But along with that came his resounding no to all the forces that opposed that, right? To the political, religious, and cultural trends of his day, those powerful authorities, he was saying no. He called them hypocrites at times, saying, what you have established here is the source of this poverty, oppression, and exclusion. And I am saying no to that. And when he says no, that's where things are no longer safe, right? That's where no longer politic or popular. That's where it starts to burn a little bit. And that's what we are challenged to do too. That's part of the way of following Christ. He says, I've come to divide families, which is really uncomfortable. We don't like that idea. But what I think he's getting at here, is that following the way of Christ means it sets us apart from the way other people might live, even from those people who are in some of our most nuclear and closely knit tribes. In his day, that might have been the family, right? It sets us apart. And in so doing, there is some bit of division, right? If we choose the way of Christ, right, in some situations, it's not that painful. It's not that distinct from others. But other ways, the way of Christ may very strongly cause us to courageously challenge cultural, political, and religious trends that are contrary to the way of Christ. And we are truly setting ourselves apart, dividing ourselves from other forms of community in order to align ourselves to the way of Christ. So, and I think we kind of know that, but it's important for us when we're together to uphold that reality, like Aaron was saying, and to recognize that this takes support from a community of like-minded Jesus followers to make those hard yeses and nos. In Community of Christ, we have been really good, I think, in our 150 or so years to figure out what we're saying yes to, right? We have thought about what matters most for us to say yes to as a faith community. And we all can agree on generosity and goodness and welcome and hospitality, all these things. And we've even refined that really beautifully in our enduring principles. These are the things that we give our resounding yes to, right? Worth of all persons, yes. Sacredness of creation, yes. Pursue peace, yes. All this, we say yes. And I believe, though, that we've got to this great place, and maybe the next step for our generation of Community of Christ is to take a firm grasp of some of the hard no's that come along with those yeses, right? You might say yes, worth of all persons, could also mean a resounding no, standing up and against mass incarceration and the death penalty. We may give a strong yes to the sacredness of creation, and that might mean having to say a strong no to eating beef products, right? And these aren't necessarily all the choices for all of us all the time, but it is an example to say that sometimes the real no that comes with our yes is where we really set the world ablaze. And it really might be a little warm and uncomfortable for us too when we set those little fires, right? So those are the main thoughts I wanted to share with us, that Jesus has come to set a fire. He said, I have come to cast a fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already ablaze. Fire image he set before us is a powerful, provocative, unruly image. And we can see that fire brings new life. It's incredibly useful. It's warming. It's inviting, but it can also get out of hand. We can't really control its power. We just let it burn where it may. Fire is refining. It can burn away and any impurity or things that stand in the way or don't belong. But in the process, it might burn us or others. It could be really uncomfortable. This is another image of Christ, this fire image. So it says its heat can be uncomfortable and even painful as it burns away what is harmful in our lives. But all at once, when the fire is lit, it can be all consuming and totally transform the landscape we live in. And this is what we hope for, with Christ ablaze in the world for peace and for justice. So my challenge for all of us today on this Dr. King Day is that we might follow the way of Jesus Christ and the challenge of Dr. King himself to take a position, boldly say yes, and the no's that come along with it, to courageously light our own little fires wherever we see them, the light of Christ, that it will soon be ablaze with justice and peace that we long for. May you have the courage, and me too.
Good morning again. For our focus question today, we'd ask you to spend some time thinking about the following. What might you be called to courageously challenge or burn away?
Sir, if you're not.
This is not something that you have to answer right now, but give yourself some time and some grace to reflect on it. And hopefully you'll be able to join us this evening for a bit of a deeper discussion on this question. Thank you.
Hello. This is going to be a spiritual practice of guided imagination. I'll walk us through envisioning images that are intended to help us find courage in our call to act in unjust situations. It'll take us about 10 minutes. So I want to invite you to find a relaxed position. Now, start by closing your eyes. Settle in by taking a few slow, deep cleansing breaths. Release any tension you notice in your body and your spirit. Open yourself to possibility and trust. Consider a situation in your life where you see injustice. It might be a circumstance where you see someone excluded, or unfairness, or wholesale dismissal, or cruelty. Contemplate that situation for a moment. What feelings arise? Where do those feelings live in your body? Let those feelings be what they are. They arise for a reason. Are you called to respond to the injustice? How could you make a hard choice and take action? What might be the outcome Imagine it. How might people involved react? What feelings arise when you imagine this? At this time, we are not going to commit to or plan out any course of action. Instead, we will use some guided imagination together to invite in the presence of Christ. Let's take another deep breath to resettle. With your eyes closed, I invite you to imagine with me. Envision yourself alone in a silent, empty, dark space. Put up a chair and sit down. Be present in the peace here for just a moment. As you sit, think again about that situation where you yearn for justice. Consider all the people involved. Who is affected by the injustice? Whose actions are the source of suffering? Who else may be impacted indirectly? I invite you now, in your mind's eye, to rise from your seat in that dark room. In the corner, you find some folding chairs. Begin setting them up, forming a circle in the center of the room. Unfold an empty chair for each of those individuals who are connected to the unjust scenario. Set up a place for each one of the wounded, the wounders, the stakeholders, and every person in between. When your circle of empty chairs is complete, return to your own seat again. Now let's welcome those individuals into this dim space. Envision and allow each person to enter quietly, one by one. Invite each one to take their own place until all have arrived. Pause for a deep, calming breath with all those souls present. In this collection of God's beloved children, you don't need words or solutions. Your only task now is to bring a light. Imagine a small table in the center of the dark circle. On the table is a candle. With whatever source you envision, strike a flame and light the candle. Your lit candle brings a small but persistent glow to the circle of faces. This flame brings a bit of warmth. The flame illuminates and brings clarity. This flame is a unifying focal point, the divinity and humanity that defines us all. This flame ignites compassion and courage. This flame is the Christ presence. Welcome Christ into this situation of brokenness. Welcome Christ into every broken heart in this circle of souls. Welcome Christ into your own feelings of uncertainty, fear, and anxiety. The Spirit is most at work in those places where transformation is unfolding. The Spirit is present even in this current situation of injustice. Rest in the light of the Christ presence and these people for a moment more. When you are ready, you may envision yourself rising and leaving this space. It will be waiting for you to return anytime you need the courage to discern and take action for justice. Thank you for being willing to join me in this practice of guided imagination. When you are ready, you may open your eyes. Peace and courage be with you.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. We wanted to take some time to remember our dear friend, Richard Hawks, while we're together on this important day. We think it's fitting. So I have some words to read for you and a song for us to listen to together. A tribute to Richard Hawks. Richard was a member of this diversity team and a beloved friend and mentor. He passed away on January 8. We want to take a minute on this day to remember him, especially his dedication to diversity and inclusion. Richard was a minister, a friend, really, to all people. I saw him eagerly greet children, young adults, the elderly, disabled and able-bodied, wealthy and poor, mentally challenged and brilliant academics. All races, all stories were welcome with him, with unconstrained love. He greeted all with equal and genuine love. Richard would listen to anyone's story with sincere interest, and he would share his own stories at length with gusto. This is the real heart of anti-racism work, and Richard was a natural. He was an advocate for racial justice in the church, and he did this in many ways. He did it by serving in official capacities on diversity committees and the like. And he advocated for diversity in all the ministerial roles and positions of authority with which he served. He advocated for racial justice by telling his own and his family's story of striving for inclusion in this church. And maybe the most powerful way that he advocated for racial justice in the church was by courageously serving as a human representative of people of color in a predominantly white church. This is an unfair burden and an impossible task for anyone. But Richard did it out of love for our faith community. And he did it with bottomless grace every day. Richard made his life a gift for all who he encountered. He was truly one of the most Christ-like souls that I have ever known. Unconditional acceptance, gentle forgiveness, guileless self-giving, life-savoring, and persistent hope. Once Richard throws his arm open to you and gave you that Richard hug, you could never forget him. And once you heard him play Wade in the Water on his guitar, he was cemented in your heart forever. So in honor of Richard Hawks, we'll watch this video of Sweet Honey in the Rock singing Wade in the Water. It's a version I'm sure that he would have loved.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water, come on and wade in the water, you gotta wade. Dressed up in white, God's gonna trouble the water. You know they must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, now you wanna wade in the water. See those children dressed in black. God's gonna trouble the water. You know, they come a long way, ain't turning back. God's gonna trouble the water. See the children, they're dressed up in blue. You know my God's gonna trouble the water. Yeah, see, it looks like my people, they're coming on through. Well, my God's gonna trouble the water. Well, everybody knows wade in the water. Trouble the water. See those children dressed in red. My God, He's gonna trouble the water. You know it must be the children that Moses led. My God, God's gonna trouble the water. All dressed in green, God's gonna trouble the water. You know they're moving down to Latin Jordan stream. Well, God's gonna trouble the water.
Some say Paul, God, my God, my God. Well, you know there ain't but one God made us all. God's gonna trouble the water. Everybody ought to just wait on the water. Wait in the water.
Let this be your sending forth, your closing prayer, your inspiration, and your challenge. Now let our hearts within us burn as with a cleansing fire. Your gracious word has stirred in us a surge of new desire. Should vision fail and courage yield to careless compromise, then redirect our faltering steps to braver enterprise. As in another time and place along a forlorn road, the Lord's renewing grace prevailed till newborn courage glowed. Our worship here has lifted us from self-indulgent care and strengthened us to incarnate the priceless hope we share. How can we now deny the voice that calls us from within, or blindly claim we need not hear another's pain and sin? In hearts that beat exultantly, renew your perfect will. and send us forth, restored again, our mission to fulfill. In the name of Jesus Christ, the one who kindles our flame, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you to each person who participated this morning, to the heart and the thought that went into our worship. And I hope that each of you experienced something meaningful. Our worship, our study continues from here. This is how we are opening our day, but we've got work to do today, and we've got work to do going forward. So today, if you are looking for another meaningful way to spend Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I want to encourage you to go to the places we talked about before. That's your newsletter, church updates, any of our socials, Facebook or Instagram. And you're going to find a link and some information about the offerings that the University of Michigan has today on Dr. King and his work and some of related topics. And then tonight, we want to invite you to join us for our discussion. That's at 7 p.m. We'll meet for about an hour. That one will not be streamed on Facebook. So if you want to join us for that, look for the Zoom link. It will be the same link we're meeting on now, but it is posted in those other places as I described before. So thank you so much again to everyone who joined us and all those who worked hard to plan this service today. May your day be blessed. Thank you.